We've been talking about changing the world and people who have changed the world, whether it's for better or for worse. We gained some perspective last week on how big the world actually is. We defined the world as the planet plus the people. And we also, last week, we had a question that some groups started on and some groups did not. But either way, I want to start on it again tonight. Let's start here with this question about what needs to change about the world. So here's how we're going to ask it in our group. If you could change one thing about the world, what would it be and why? We all seem to have this same idea that the world does need to change. Mostly it's because we see things in the world that are not good and we want to change those things. There's something inside us that says, wait, this is not the way it should be. And frankly, we're right about that. There is something wrong with the world. Something does need to change. So let's figure out what that is. This is our big question for tonight. What's wrong with the world? The Bible certainly has things to say about what's wrong with the world, and we'll need to start at the beginning again, because you're probably wondering, has the world always been this way? Has it always been this messed up? Well, last week we touched on the creation story, the beginning of the Bible, and we talked about how the world belongs to God because He created it. Well, in that same story, there's a lot more stuff about the world. The Genesis story describes God creating the universe in several stages called days in the Genesis account. And in each of these days, God does something different, and then He declares it good. Let me give you some examples here. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light, and God saw that the light was good. "Let the land produce vegetation," and God saw that that was good. He set the sun and the moon, saw it was good. God created the creatures of the sea and saw that it was good. God created human beings in His image and saw that it was very good. Several times in the creation story, the creation is described as being good. And this is what we would expect from God. What He creates is good. But we just talked about how we can look around us and see all the things that are not good. So what happened? Well, many of you know the next part of this story already. God puts Adam and Eve in the garden to tend it, to live there, and to work the garden. And He gives them this great freedom with only really basically one rule. He says, that one tree over there, you cannot eat from that tree. Well, the serpent comes along, and most people believe that the serpent is a representation of Satan coming to tempt Adam and Eve. And he kind of sidles up to Eve and he says, hey, it's not that big a deal. You can go ahead and eat from that tree. What's the worst that could happen? I'm paraphrasing all of this, of course. But the bottom line is, Adam and Eve decide to do their own thing instead of following God's way. Well, the implications of this decision then ring throughout the entire human history. The whole thing falls apart, and not just a little bit. It's not just Adam and Eve who experience the consequences of disobeying God. The way the story describes it, then there's a curse. And the word curse is the word that is used. Now, we tend to understand curses from fairy tales that we know, that we heard when we were little, or maybe Disney movies that we watch even now. In fact, I think this would be a conversation worth having. Let's just pause here for a second, and I want you to talk about fairy tales, but specifically I want you to talk about the curses that happen in fairy tales. I'll give you a few examples, but you can do this just for fun. Go to the fairy tales, talk about curses. Fairy tales actually are kind of a good reference point for what it means to be under a curse. The curse that gets described in the Genesis story actually has two parts. One part that affects the planet, one part that affects the people. Let's start with the people. The curse that the human race is now under is that sin and death have now entered the picture for the human race. Romans 5 describes it this way. When Adam sinned, sin entered the world. Adam's sin brought death, so death spread to everyone, for everyone sinned. Now that word sin is important in the Bible, and it really just means anything that goes against God's will. And the sin problem is in all of us. None of us can escape it. In fact, this verse describes that we are born into sin. It's almost like we didn't even have a choice. The curse affected us before we even showed up. But we also know that the sin problem is in us because of how we behave. We know that we don't always do the right thing. We know that sometimes we go against God. And so sin is part of the curse, but death is also part of the curse. We all know what death is, and the Bible describes sin and death as being the curse that Adam's choice brought into the human race. The people are now under a curse. But the curse also is described as being a curse on the planet itself, on creation itself, on nature. Here's the way Romans describes this part of the curse. For the creation was subjected to frustration in the hope that creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay. Creation is in bondage. I think this is kind of like when you see the movie Frozen, or in the Chronicles of Narnia, when the kids first show up to Narnia and the place is in perpetual winter. Nothing grows. It's cold. I mean, things still live there, but it's clearly not living up to its potential. And then part of the story is that the curse gets lifted and everything now can grow again. So I think that's what the scriptures are talking about, what the Bible is talking about when it says the planet, the creation is under a curse, not living up to its full potential, subjected to bondage and decay, and death affects the earth, not just the people on earth. Now, I know this is a lot for me to throw at you at once, and you may need some time to sort of process this. So this whole idea of a curse, I want you to talk about it in your group, and we'll use these questions to frame that conversation. What evidence do you see that people are sinful? And what evidence do you see that the creation is under a curse? Now let's see if we can tie all this together. We started with the big question of what is wrong with the world, and everything that we can see around us, all of that stuff we talked about at the beginning, stuff we wish we could change about the world. All of this is tied to the world, the planet, and the people being under a curse. We, the human race, are cursed with sin and death. The planet is cursed with death and decay. What's wrong with the world? It's cursed. This is terrible news if the story ends here. If that's all there is, then we can throw in the towel, we can call off the fight, we can go ahead and give up now because we're under a curse, and who can fight against a curse? Except that's not the end of the story. The world is changeable. The curse can be lifted, but we'll have to wait till next week to get into that part of the story.
Spoken word, a world created, a single voice, a breaking light, fills the universe with color, a waking moment for man.